Hi everyone, welcome to this virtual edition of our monthly Insight program. So my name's Naomi Tosick, and of course we're normally downstairs in the Golden Age cinema, but as my guests are south of the border and there's a raging hailstorm, thunderstorm down there, so we might have a little bit of technical problems, but we thought that we'd do this as a virtual panel anyway. And the topic is ignition, so hopefully it's been that halftime pep talk that you've all needed just to it's been a bit of an awful year. So I think it's all about just getting that ignition and making sure that we're feeling really positive. So before we welcome our guests, I do want to give a welcome to country and pay our respects to the leaders past, present and emerging as we gather virtually. So I want to specifically acknowledge the aura of the Gadigal here in Sydney, the Wurundjeri of the Kulin down in Melbourne, and the Palawa of Tasmania. So we welcome also any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island people that are tuning into our live stream. I can see that we have someone has joined, so excuse me while we saw. That's okay. I'd also like to acknowledge the Sydney Community Foundation and the important work that they do. So our program, of course, supports the work of the Women's Business Incubator. So it's for migrant and disadvantaged women. So again, your support of us allows us to also support them. So a great thank you and a hi to anyone from Sydney Community that's watching. So ignition, it's very intentionally a blend of some previous topics that we've looked at this year. So in February we had goodness, in April it was all about purpose, and then productivity in May. So for us, ignition is that magical kind of tipping point where we move from purpose into productivity and from rhetoric into response. So this whole panel has also been inspired by one very amazing book and one really incredible woman. So Jane Tewson, who this book is about, is from Igniting Change. It's an intentionally tiny charity down in Melbourne. And Jane actually can't join us tonight. So hello, Jane, if you're watching, and we wish you well. But we have the next best thing. So Martin Flanagan wrote this book. He's an Australian author, a very renowned AFL journalist. So hi to all our Melbourne watchers. And Martin's also written, I think, 12 books, Martin. So he followed Jane around for 2 years writing this book, and we're really pleased to be able to have him. So hello down in Tasmania to you, Martin.
Thank you very much.
Good to see you. And Jane has also been a connector for the other two panel members that we've got. So Radek Saleh, who some of you may know, is the CEO of Swiss for a number of years, and he was introduced and brought onto this panel through Jane because he's also a director of Igniting Change. Radek led an incredible company for a good decade, and in the end Swiss was sold for a great figure to Biostem, and Radek has been able to move on to really purpose-driven work that he's done with his organisation Light Warrior. So I'm so excited to have Radek on the panel as well. Hi Radek, down in Flinders in Melbourne. We're outside Melbourne.
Wonderful to be here, and thanks for having me.
Thanks, Radek. And our third guest I'm going to introduce, and she will come in. There has been a thunderstorm in Melbourne, so her computer's being rebooted, but we will let her join us. I think she's wanting to come in. Let's welcome. That's perfect timing. That was perfect timing because I'm about to introduce you. So let me tell everyone about you. So Mary is the co-founder. She's also the chair and the chief fundraiser for Learning for Life Autism Centre. So Mary's a former veterinary surgeon, which I think I wanted to very much be in a former life. And Mary's connection to Jane is that Igniting Change is a great supporter of Learning for Life. And for me, as a mum of a son on the spectrum, I'm just so aware of how important the service is that she's provided. She's raised millions of dollars and provided a whole learning structure that's very specialised care for these very special children. So we'll hear more about that. But welcome, Mary, in the nick of time.
Hi, Naomi. We've got a big storm in Melbourne, and I was just about to say, what if my internet goes boom.
You tempted that, I think. Well, Mary, I'm going to start with you because we've got you in the hot seat. So can you tell us about what Learning for Life does?
Yeah, sure. So we set up, in 2004, and yeah, when you say Mary does this and Mary does that, well, it isn't Mary that does this or Mary just does that. 6 founders got together in 2004, and we saw an issue that we needed to address, and it was to provide services to children and make them accessible. So the services that we provide are intensive early intervention. It's home-based. That's what we first started with. As the years went by, the children that went through early intervention were going to school. And so as we grew too, we wanted to provide the services to transition them into school. So we provided a school transition program and then a school consultancy program. And then we worked in whole schools. We've just developed in the last few years a whole school training program. In later years, we took on a social skills program. We run parent training. But yeah, it started with early intervention. That was the start.
And this is 16 years and you started with, was it 4? And now you've got almost 40 therapists.
Yeah. We the first year we only had 3 children and about 5 therapists. That included the clinical director who also ran the business, and she was just like did everything, and I was the chief fundraiser. So that started that way, and now we've got a huge team, and we have about 40-50 kids in early intervention. We work with hundreds of kids and schools across Melbourne. So. Yeah.
Very exciting. Radek, I'm going to ask you. So I missed to say in your intro, though, that you're part of the B team, which for me is a bit like the Navy SEALs version of the corporate world that are out to kind of do amazing things. So Richard Branson, Ariana Huffington, Radek Saleh. So tell us about your work with the B team, but also what Light Warrior does.
Sure. So maybe I'll step back to my time at Swiss, and what built a lot of my success at Swiss and our success there was our culture and how people felt about coming to work. And that's because we focused on creating purpose. And so the thing that kept me up at night was, whether people felt great about their workplace. So that to me is how we as business leaders can make a massive difference in society today. So having sold my business to a Chinese company, I'm indebted to the Australian system of capitalism and giving back and making sure I use that to make this place even better than what it is, and leave Swiss in a wonderful state, which it has. It's grown from strength to strength, and they've added on more jobs in Australia as well as overseas, and it was the right thing to do at that time. And so now I'm obsessed with this kind of fusion between community and business, and trying to find that right mark with knowing the fact that community style work that we do at Igniting Change is the spark that creates purpose in a lot of organisations, and heroes like Mary are people we love walking alongside. And if we could work out a way that every business has kind of that sort of partnership where it's give and take and learning from each other, how much better society would be. And so stepping into the B team, where you meet all of these CEOs of very large companies, they're speaking this language, and this language 15 years ago was non-existent when I was at Swiss, and this whole focus on culture and how people feel about their workplace and the purpose and the importance of these organisations being global citizens, is bestowed upon them as shareholders. And I think big business is getting ahead of government here, and particularly like Australia, and this is why it's pretty relevant. Just this week I had we had a subgroup meet, and it's over 20 different CEOs of big ASX listed organisations, some of the biggest carbon emitters in the world, and they're making commitments to net zero 2050, and our government haven't done that. So we're seeing businesses moving ahead of that social paradigm.
And I remember you were saying that the people in the B team were sort of at purpose even 15 years ago. So I won't ask you now, but at the end, I want to know what they're looking towards as well. But tell us what Light Warrior invests in.
Yeah, so Light Warrior is what my wife said to me when she fell in love with me. She said, "You're my Light Warrior." So the name's supposed to put a smile on your face. And so we bring light to the world. We're the warriors because we go to work and we make it happen. And our foundation's called Light Folk, and we provide for the good folk. And our folk try and do the same thing in bringing light to the world. So again, we're obsessed with culture and creating amazing workplaces. And I'll never forget the impact and how great I felt when I'd have executives, wives or husbands say to me, my partner's a much better person as a result of working in your organisation. And so that's what we strive to do. And so, 4 out of 5 of us work in commercial organisations. So if we all felt that great about what we did for the majority of our waking hours, how much better would society be? So we want to move that dial, and we want to be successful, unashamedly successful in doing that, and prove to people that we can use capitalism for good and be conscious about what we do with it.
I love that. I think we're all much better people when we sit inside our purpose and are doing what we are passionate about. So now, Martin, tell us a slightly different question for you. Why did you write this book, and how would you describe the work that Jane and Igniting Change does?
Well, the reason I wrote the book is that although I'm known as a sports writer, I've always written other things as well. And there is so much bad news in the world. Trump, Europe fracturing, climate change, income inequality. There's all these really serious problems that there doesn't seem to be any answer for. And it doesn't seem that governments are equal to the problems of our time. And that gets me down, and I understand why young people feel anxiety because, where are the elders and what are they doing? So for me, I've always been interested in good news. And when I say good news, I don't mean sentimental news, and I don't mean cheap news. I mean news that's rigorously investigated and reported in a disciplined way, which actually shows that there is goodness in the world. And I've seen a lot of goodness in the world. My father survived a war crime, and he still believed there was goodness in the world. And when I've done a lot of work over the years with Aboriginal people, and when I went out into Aboriginal Australia, that was the thing that really affected me deeply, was that the attitudes that my father and some of the other survivors had to do with compassion and to do with universal beliefs about humanity, I found them in Aboriginal elders. And that sort of confirmed me in my path. So all through my writing career, I've tried to balance my boat by telling good news. And if I do it well enough, it seems to balance other people's. So as far as Jane's concerned, my wife had met her before I did, and my wife's family are not people who are easily impressed. And, but Polly came home and she said, I met this interesting woman today, and she told me a bit about Jane. And then in the early 2000s, I was confronted with the issue of torture in South Africa, and it had a huge effect on me. And about 2 years later, I gave a speech at the survivors for torture in, I think it's in Northcote in Melbourne, and the Centre for the Survivors of Torture. And there was this woman in the front row busily taking notes, and my wife said to me, "That's Jane Tewson." And that was where I met her, and I immediately liked her. I mean, she just enters your life as a friendly presence. And my opinion of her hasn't changed since that moment. I mean, she's a wonderful friend to have in your life.
That's beautiful. And she wouldn't say this about herself. I think it's almost serendipitous that you're there. I know she was shy to have the book written and shy to have much publicity, but she does incredible work. Tell us about, you went to Northern Territory, to Port Phillip Prison. Tell us where you went.
Oh, well, I mean, endless places. We went into Port Phillip Prison, to the Youth Detention Centre, which she played a big part in establishing. We went to a shelter for sex workers. We went with RAD, we went to a school in Alice Springs, which is run by the Arrernte Elders.
Yeah.
And it's run on Aboriginal principles. And because of Jane and people like RAD, it doesn't have to apply for government grants. Because it doesn't have to apply for government grants, it doesn't get whitefella KPIs. So it's a completely different idea. But I never got my head around the full range of what Jane does. She does so much, and I just saw a random sample of what she does, and so as a journalist, journalists, the patron saint of journalism is doubting Thomas. You've got to put your finger in the wound before you believe. So I wanted to satisfy myself that these things worked, and then I wanted to work out how it was she did it. Because I think a lot of people want to do good but don't know how, or have a go and get defeated and then become cynical.
And I think that's where the book is so interesting, because the Art of Pollination, it's very much that she's this busy bee and there's a whole ecosystem around. So, and you mentioned, the saint. So I've got another saint to throw to you guys. It's Augustine of Hippo, and he famously said, he talked about two cities, and it was the idea that man could live life serving himself or could have empathy for others. So I think in these stories we really see not just the people on screen, but the people you work with that are serving others. So maybe, Radic, I'll ask you, what is it that makes, for you perhaps, and people around you, what have been some examples of why, you've had this empathy for other people and not just hoarded your wealth and kind of worked on the things that you were interested in?
Yeah, I was very lucky to grow up with a father and mother who were right into kind of the psyche and things like diet and lifestyle being an important part of feeling good about life. And also, I'll never forget my father saying to me, "Just money doesn't matter. It'll come. Just do the right thing." And so Dad's always worked for universities, not for profit. My mother's a medical scientist, and she's not your average scientist. She'd look at blood and look for nutrition in the blood, and sort of support my father's work. He was one of the first people to talk about diet causing disease. And so he was laughed at back in the 70s when he first did this research. And it got published finally in the 90s, 20 years later, and so in British Medical Journal. And so there was this one of many examples, watching Dad struggle, sort of fight the system in, something that we all just take as common knowledge now. Back then was really hard on him. And for him to just give so much and know that it was the right thing to do, without thinking about how much it would affect him and how ostracized he was as a result of that. It was just great testament about sticking to your inner truth and following your intuition and your belief. I mean, he was one of the first people to do, he was the first, so he was involved in trials and meditation and how that would affect cancer patients and dealing with the stresses of cancer, and even as a supporting treatment, not as the only treatment, as a supporting treatment in dealing with a chronic disease like cancer. So.
And Radic, if I can add to that, I was so impressed with you till I read about your father, Professor Avni Sali. And so he's the father of integrated medicine, which is incredible, and there's such a legacy. So he has founded the National Institute of Integrative Medicine there in Melbourne. So, I mean, you're great, but he's phenomenal.
Yeah, he's amazing. And he still works harder than I've ever worked. And he's 80 this year, wow. 7 days a week. Longest hours you ever see. He loves it. He lives for it, and is so committed to helping people.
That's a great example. So Mary, we'll throw to you. Where have you got this sort of idea to read and this notion of looking at others, and who's been some examples that have put you on this path with Learning for Life?
Well, Tom, my husband, and I, we sort of a partner in crime. We had friends whose son went through the program that we now run at Learning for Life, and we watched him gain great skills. He was taught to speak. He was taught to play, not just with the toys themselves, because he didn't know what they were for. So he was taught how to play, and then how to play with other children, and eventually got to school. And so at the time I had my own family and I wasn't working, and I put the veterinary career on pause, and I actually was looking for something different. And Tom and I had gone through this stage where, you know, they say your 20s are for learning and your 30s are for earning, and then we're sort of at the 40s. It's like, what should we do? We felt very, very privileged ourselves, and I think we wanted to give back. You know, did we adopt a child? Did we? You know, we thought through various things, but we saw that this particular program for children with autism was available, but it came at a great cost, not only financially, because it's an intensive program, the early intervention. So a child may do 20 to 40 hours of one-on-one therapy a week. So if you imagine the cost of the therapy hours, it's beyond what an average family could dream of affording. And not only that, back in the 90s, this was, the families actually had to source their own therapists. So they were given a program and a supervisor who ran the program, but the parents had to organise therapists to come into the house. So there might be 3-4 therapists rostered on through the week. And parents had to run their own small business at home. They might have siblings or be trying to work themselves. It was a really big call for them to do. So we thought that we would set up Learning for Life to not only help financially for people who couldn't afford to access the program, so financially subsidised programs, but to set up a model where we had a full service model where we actually trained therapists and then sent them to the families. So we timetabled them, we paid them, back then families, were doing cash in hand, that, there weren't, it was tricky that there wasn't any insurance and stuff like that. So we put those things in place. And we also decided from the get-go we would set up some research, take data, so we could show that the programs in Australia, in the community settings, were working. So one of our founders, and who's also a patron, she's Dr. Amanda Sampson. So she knew, she's a doctor, so she knew to set up, the data collection from the very beginning. So, and then we also looked at the way that families were running these programs also, and they were employing therapists who were often speech pathologists, students, psychology students, people in education who were at uni, and they were doing really great jobs and they'd be trained up, but they were like passing through. So they were lost to the system in a way. So we decided at Learning for Life that we would set up our own career pathway, and so that there'd be a structure to the careers.
And Mary, that's what I think is incredible, because it's not just giving money to one thing. You've actually built and grown an ecosystem that supports not just the children but the families and also the therapists. So, and now you've moved to adult, sort of, as these kids are getting older.
We're stepping our way up to up towards youth, we thought we sort of toyed with the idea of do Tom and I sponsor a child and just look after one family, but it's really a drop in the ocean when you look at the numbers of children affected by autism.
And how many have gone through your program?
I knew you were going to ask that. I'm not a stats person. There are stats, but I would say hundreds in the early intervention have gone through our programs.
That's incredible.
Over the last 16 years.
Well done. Martin, so you can answer this on Jane's behalf. Tell us about Jimmy that was quite foundational for Jane's work, and also maybe about Blue, her mum, and sort of part of setting her on this path.
Well, Jane's a fascinating human being because she appears conventional, and in many ways she is, but in other ways she's entirely unconventional. And her parents were really interesting people. Her father was at Cambridge in the 30s when Philby and Maclean, all those famous Cambridge spies that came out of England, were there. And he became a left-winger. He became a conscientious objector. Then when Hitler emerged, he decided that he had to do something about it, and he joined up in a pacifist capacity, and he was one of those people that went and diffused unexploded bombs. Incredibly dangerous work. He eventually got blown up. He got the George Cross, and in hospital decided to become a doctor. And mother is this complete maverick young woman in England in the 1930s who spends a lot of time with the local gypsies and is always a total individual. She becomes a doctor, so both Jane's parents are doctors. And Jimmy is Jane's friend, and he has an intellectual disability, and they play together, and she loves him. And so the big thing in Jane's life, she wanted to be a doctor, but she's dyslexic and she failed year 12. So she gets to London and she gets a job at the Royal Society for the Mentally Handicapped. And she finds out that in these big London charities, 90% of the money they raise is going on the institution. And then she is shocked to find that no one in her office actually knows or has anything to do with kids with intellectually handicapped. And they see it as tragic. And she remembers the joy that she and Jimmy used to have. And so she then approaches a businessman who doesn't have a reputation of ever having done anything good for anyone, and says to him she's got an idea for a charity where 100% of the money that's raised goes to the people on whose behalf it's raised, and all the costs of the charity are sponsored by business. And this bloke backs her. And then she meets a journalist in a pub from the Sunday Times who's just been to the Edinburgh Festival, and he's written a column saying it's too big for Edinburgh, it might as well be in Nether Wallop, which is a village of 500 people in Hampshire. So she says, let's do it. He says, what? And she says, let's hold the first Interwallop International Arts Festival. They then write to the 200 top entertainers in Britain, and 50 of them agreed to be in it. Bill Wyman from the Rolling Stones, Rowan Atkinson, the young ones, Peter Cook, Gore Vidal comes. And then before it happens, she goes around and sells the documentary rights to London Weekend Television for a 5-figure sum. And that's how she gets started.
Yeah.
And it's...
Oh, we've lost you, Martin. Have I got you, Radic and Mary?
She goes back out. She goes to South Sudan, where she's previously died. She's been declared dead from cerebral malaria. She goes back out and she launches comic relief from a refugee camp in the South Sudan, and it becomes the biggest charity in Britain. I think by 2015 it had raised over £1 billion for charities. So that story gives you a sense of the various qualities that are at play in what she does. Like, she's audacious,
yes.
She's creative, but she's ordinary. And her ordinariness gives her a universality, because one of the interesting things about her is that her appeal transcends culture, it transcends religion, it transcends gender. And I think it's her ordinariness, and I mean that sort of like in the sense that the Buddhists use it, that she's in the now, and people recognise it about her, and they feel safe with it.
That's incredibly poetic, Martin. I think you put that beautifully, like you've written a book about it. Radhik, I want to ask you, we're talking about this ignition point. How do you get the momentum? Because it's obviously previously you've come from village into Swiss, and then again you are taking things up to another level with Light Warrior. But how do you kind of keep getting that momentum and that kind of drive? What fuels you? You talked about gratitude before and sort of feeling grateful.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm wired a bit differently to others, but for some reason, ever since kind of starting in any sort of work at village, I watched my friends at university, and I was at university as well, and I did it as a part-time role, and I just saw it as insane that I was paying for university, but then also getting paid to work in this part-time job where I could learn the fundamentals of business. And so it just struck me that if I took that really seriously very early on, I could get ahead. And suddenly I was getting paid for something that was learning. And so I'd go to work and just love it because it was this experience that I was building. And then I'd start to shift manage and manage people that were my friends. So I had to be a good bloke about it. I had to be the same person that they'd have a drink with on the weekend as I was at work. And I had to convince them that we had to get the job done. So I started thinking about purpose and inspiring people at quite a young age. And then I started having to manage people that are older than me and had to practice kind of my craft on how I could bring them along for the journey too. So starting out that in that kind of early stage and thinking about it like I was then, and essentially, taking my work as seriously as a professional athlete and doing it for the love, but doing it because I got so much out of it. And I think you cannot be successful unless you kind of make that decision that you're committed and you're going to make the most of every waking hour you spend in it. And you're also, it's not like a sports person where it's a relentless pursuit of physical prowess. It's got to be that balance of, you've got to work hard and give your mental focus to it, but you also have to have a high level of emotional intelligence.
Yes.
And that's something you have to develop over time and you get better at. And interestingly, when I was at Swiss, we did some double-blind trials on meditation and measuring people that were meditating. And what we found that we helped their stress levels. But at the end of that sort of 8 weeks of a commitment to meditation, people were more emotionally intelligent, which is just one tool that we can kind of have along the way and helping us become better leaders.
And you very much talk around kind of the community, the team. And I know at Swiss you were really specific about the communication, how the team would write emails and send off emails. So I get that feeling every level of the business, it's kind of you have to live and embody the purpose.
Yeah, I think of it like a personal trainer. If you go to a personal trainer and they say, right, do 10 push-ups, and if 8 push-ups in they say to you, you look tired today, you're not going to get through it, it doesn't work. You go to them to be inspired.
Yeah.
And so I think about it at workplaces. A lot of workplaces that go into that bad personal trainer where we just talk each other down, we bring each other down, and we don't look out to help each other. And can you imagine how much better people are going to feel if we're there to support and talk about how we're going to solve situations rather than try and point out who's done the wrong thing and kind of abdicate any kind of responsibility for what's going on. So I think that language is a massive part of that. And that's also a massive part of how Igniting Change thinks about its work with community. And that's where Jane and I share a very similar spark because we're very careful with the language we choose to use because it's creating that level of respect and the kind of foundations for how you kind of go forward together and be productive together and constructive.
I have to say the Igniting Change branding is phenomenal, the way words are used in that. So I'm sure that was part of your involvement. But Martin, I'm going to come back to you. Again, tell us how does Jane get this energy to keep going? She's relentless. And I just wonder how she kind of keeps going. Where's her drive come from?
Boy, oh boy, is she relentless, I'm here to tell you. I agreed to spend a year with her. I was lucky to get out after 2.5. She is, she's impossible to say no to. Gandhi said if you do the right thing for the right reason, you'll generally be protected. And she does the right thing for the right reason transparently. And everything sort of fits into place around that. Where does she get her energy from? Well, one of the things I find very lovable about her is every time you meet her, she's as fresh as a bunch of flowers every time. And she's always got this beautiful friendliness. Every time you meet her, she greets you with this beautiful friendliness. I reckon if you asked her that question, she'd say sort of what Radhik and I think Mary would say is that they get so much energy back from what they do. Yeah. And the only time in the book when she got annoyed with me was when just after we've had Trump, we've had Brexit and Boris Johnson, and then Morrison gets back in, and that was a real down time. And I rang her at the office, and I can't remember what I asked her, and I pushed her to give me a more eloquent answer, because her eloquence often comes when she's first forced to burst out. And anyway, she said, "You're pissing me off." And I said, "Well, I need you to tell me. It's not for me to guess. I need you to tell me." But I realised that day she felt like I did about these political developments. But here she was burrowing in to a bloke who was out of prison was trying to set up a business and needed a personal computer. And she'd gone around and she'd got him one. And she said to me, "People can be so fantastic." And I realised that's how she gets her energy. The worse it is, the harder she goes, the more she puts in. And she's just so honest. She's just a really honest emotionally, honest intellectually person. Yeah.
I love that. And I want to parallel, because we talked a little bit about one of the books you famously wrote, the short long book on Michael Long. And in a way, they're both reluctant heroes that just were dissatisfied with status quo and, determined to do something. So what's your parallel between these two people?
Well, I think people would be unnerved if they knew how well Michael Long can read people and what he can see in people. And Jane's the same.
Wow.
And in the Michael Long book, I said, he's one of those people who doesn't have to know much detail about your life to know where you are on the spiritual map. And he just sort of arranges himself around that.
Wow.
And Jane can read people incredibly well. And in the book, I quote Jade, who's, a former ice addict and lived it tough, and she's seen a big range of humanity. And that's one of the things she says about Jane, is how she can read people as soon as they come through the door. And when we first started working, I was a bit nervous with her. After a couple of weeks, she said to me one day, "Relax, I know who you are." and I thought, she does. So I see them both as having that gift. They're both gifted people in very different ways. And they both, when they see what has to be done, they go. And I once met the leader of the democracy movement in Cambodia. I think his name was Ramsey Sam. And I got an audience with him and I could ask one question. And I said to him, "Where does your courage come from?" Because he'd done incredible things. And his answer was, "When you're in a situation and you feel there's a right thing to do, go, do it. Don't hesitate, because it's in the hesitation that you get lost." Mm. And I reckon both Jane and Michael Long are like that. Michael Long went to one too many Aboriginal deaths and just decides he has to do something, and the next day starts walking the camera. And gradually it becomes a national issue. And Jane's just like that all the time.
Yeah.
She's connected to so many people, and she's got so many things on the go at once. And it's all as a result of those sort of impulses.
Beautiful. That's really interesting. So, Mary, if we think about children on the spectrum, they don't have this intuition, and it is harder for them to understand our big, crazy world. So, in that sense, I want to ask you around the secret society and sort of the work that you do there, but also how attitudes are changing. I think over 16 years, how the work that you've done has really helped to change attitudes around autism and families.
Well, there's been such a great change about how people perceive autistic people, even as you're saying about the language you use, both Radek and Martin, words are important. These days, listening to autistic voices is really important. So I think when we first started, it was, person with autism, and now we listen to autistic voices and it's, autistic person. But because it's a spectrum, this is what we've really learned, is that there's a saying that if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. So you can get all tangled in the language, but it's actually you're dealing with the person, and that's where the igniting change, see the person and not the label, just resonates so much with what we do. Is there's no prescriptive language. We need to see the person and their diversity. So neurodiversity has become something that's well recognised now. Even reading the book about Jane's dyslexia, that's a type of neurodiversity. So the way people think and the different way people think creates these incredible innovations, and there's no barriers for Jane. Well, people with autism too, we need to see them as having their strengths. So again, in the 90s, I think a lot of terminology was seen in the deficit mode. So what can someone not do? And these days we do look at challenges, children with autism. I said children with autism, autistic people, whatever. You actually you do look at their challenges, but you use their strengths and their passions and their interests. And what I've learned from all this is that there is no normal and there is no typical person. We're all on this human spectrum, and the autism spectrum, you have to actually look at every individual. You can't just sort of say all people with autism are good at maths, or all people with autism think in pictures, like Temple Grandin. She was the first person who taught us how she thought and saw things or realised things differently, but then that's not the same for all people. So that's really changed a lot. And the way we work with children at Learning for Life, it's very individualised. So you look at their strengths and their challenges and how they learn. So, little Luke or Jack or whatever, how does he or she learn? And you work the program or what they need. So there are some children who can't speak, and they may need to actually learn to imitate how to make sounds, or there might be children who, we can get onto technology, but there's no one size fits all. And that's really the big thing that sort of has changed, and the fact that there is this spectrum of people, that everyone's different and they all have something to bring to the table.
And I love that answer, because it does tie back to our whole theme. It's about igniting change. It's about not maintaining status quo. And I think each of you are responding in ways to show it's what's out of the box and is what's really interesting. Radek, it reminds me, Mary's reminded me that for igniting change, it's all about not just giving to people, but giving them a voice. So perhaps as someone that's involved in the organisation, tell us about how that happens. How are people given a voice with Igniting Change?
I think it's the visits. So it's the experiences where we're very lucky and only Jane's very selective as to who can come along to those community visits and meet these champions. And it's about getting that right mix of people just to spend time and listen and hear firsthand what one of these champions might be doing in community. And it's so diverse. I've been on all sorts, and you've heard from the other speakers about the sorts of things that I see get involved with. And I love the diversity of that, being an entrepreneur. And the empathy and understanding and that learning to kind of sit and listen and ask questions, you just gain so much. And I suppose I can best surmise it by how much fulfillment I get from it is that my wife can tell if I've been in an Igniting Change board meeting or on a visit. She just says, you're in a great mood, you're a different person. And it just goes back to, me feeling pretty special when my team back at Swiss, when they would say, I'd have partners say to me, they're a better person as a result of that. This is just a wonderful thing that you can get involved with and get at grassroots level and help these people, support these people who then in turn give you so much back. And it is so rewarding. So it's just a wonderful journey, the experience. It's not just about a one-way interaction. It's a relationship.
And it is much more than money. I love your reference to that entrepreneur's journey, because you think of the Port Phillip prison and the guys were doing their T-shirt business, and it's almost sort of creating little spot fires where other businesses are able to be self-sufficient. So Martin, have you got any other examples that you've seen in your journey of great initiatives that kind of are able with Igniting Change to just keep rolling?
Well, Igniting Change is sort of one after another of those. So even if you go to that one particular story, when that project of the T-shirt printing business, when that wasn't doing that well. So Jane says to the prisoner who's running it, what could we do to help you? And he says a bit of recognition wouldn't hurt from outside. So the next time she turns up with Richard Branson and the fellow who's in charge of Toll, right, what was his name? The bloke who's in charge of Toll.
Paul Little.
Yeah, Paul Little. So she turns up in his cell with Richard Branson and Paul Little, and at the same time, the woman who was running the youth detention centre, who was doing it, she was playing a lone hand, and the whole prison culture was against her because the warders reckoned these young blokes were doing easy time, and the other prisoners didn't like it because they thought they were getting it easy. And Richard Branson turns up, and all of a sudden it's accepted in the culture of prison. So I mean, she's just non-stop. She's like a box of crackers with a match dropped in it. She's just non-stop in this thing. And if you're ever talking to her about anything, she'll see a possibility for it. Like someone's talking to her. She told me yesterday she's thinking about doing the Nether Wallop Festival here in Tasmania.
I'd go as far as saying she's the greatest social entrepreneur the earth has seen.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
She's something else.
That's pretty awesome. Mary, what about you when we look at your ecosystem when we talk about Learning for Life? It's the same thing, that you're not just kind of educating children, but you're enabling parents and people to sort of have a lot more control and autonomy. So what are some great examples and things that maybe that Igniting Change have been able to help you achieve?
Well, Igniting Change have connected us with organisations who they in turn have walked alongside us and helped build the capacity of our organisations so we can help more children and we can go into disadvantaged schools. For instance, couple of schools in Shepparton we went to, and so those sorts of things. Having some organisations, so walking alongside you and help funding some of the projects that we have is a really has been just so significant in our growth. So and we have built what we call our Learning for Life village. So igniting change. So Jane would introduce us to different people who would join our village, and then we would have parents come and talk and share their stories, and that way people understand, what we do and how that can make a big impact for the children and the families that we work with, and that village has just grown and grown.
And I know one of Jane's mantras is about connecting remarkable people, so remarkable things can happen. And if we think about the people that are tuning in, I think there's so many great examples across these 3 stories. It's around having that laser focus, but also being unafraid to sort of step out of the box and having your team around you, of course. And I want to ask each of you one of our final questions just around change. Obviously, this is all about making the world a different place. So perhaps, Radhika, start with you, and what's sort of at the heart of the kind of world that you want to see going forward? And again, perhaps referencing things that were involved in, like the Wanderlust festivals and all sorts of things that you're doing.
Yeah, I think starting with the sense of change is not easy, and we're creatures of habit. So we've even got a saying for the fact that that change isn't easy. We like to wake up in the same bed every day. We like to get up at a pretty similar time. We like to go to bed at a pretty similar time. So when you're thinking about change, you have to think about it as a dynamic that you're creating some greater good. You're creating purpose around that change, and you have to cheer people along to help them deal with that change and support them. So I think that we need to just think about how we can position change as a positive thing and position it as something that will enable us to be in a better place, but also reinforce that it takes a whole lot of hard work to create change. And so I just go back to this opportunity that we have, and I still haven't seen in the world a better system than what we have with this capitalism and democracy mold blend that we have here in Australia. We've got to nurture that and bring out the best in it and work really hard to make it better. And unless we're relentless about that, and we think about how we can each do our part in enabling that. So my part is through business, and I believe if I do business really, really well, and think about my business being a great workplace and its place in society, and then what it can do alongside community to make community better, because the business is irrelevant if community isn't going well as well, then we're going to start to create change. So that circle of influence, our circle of influence is business, and its role in community is so important. And then we know that as we get better and better, that our circle of influence will get larger, and hopefully we'll make our society a better place. So leave the place in better nick than when I started, hopefully.
Very good. So Mary, back to you. What is the change that you dream for Learning for Life, and sort of the all the people that are involved in that, and for you personally as well?
My big dream is that for autistic people to feel that they belong in our society. In the early days, it's the idea of same idea as doing charity unto others rather than walking alongside them. I think with autistic people in the early days, I think everyone tried to make people fit in to schools, into the community, into the workplaces. I would like our workplaces and schools and our communities to not only have, awareness of autism, an acceptance of autism, but to actually appreciate people with autism, so that, so that if you're looking for a job, the standard interview practices, can be changed, and people are working on these things. That in schools, so we run Inclusion Works, a program where, we train teachers to see why is a child doing what they're doing, and how can we help to teach them in the way that they can learn, and then in turn also help their peers understand them, so that there's a two-way thing. An example of inclusion that I loved, one of our therapists was working in a school, and she said they were having, what did she call it? A something body break, where, the kids just had a little dance. It was an active body break, I think she called it. And one of the little kids started spinning around in circles. The kid, the autistic child, was spinning around in circles, and all the other children thought that looked like really like fun, and that sort of joining into that space, that was an inclusive act, and our supervisor was just really thrilled that these things were like meeting in the middle, that kids were meeting in the middle. It wasn't trying to make autistic children fit in this situation, that we should come towards each other. Sorry, I'm not very articulate in this area. I have this idea in my head.
You're speaking my language, and that's my dream for my son as well. Thank you.
And so the work that we do is to teach the skills that children can use and choose to use, so they can be their authentic selves. That's my biggest dream, because you don't teach a child to do something just to do something. It's so that they have the choice to follow the direction in their life that they want to go. And even though it's a hackneyed expression, we say we want them to reach their potential, because a lot of autistic people never quite get the chance to reach their potential because they haven't been taught in the way that they need to be taught. So, yeah.
It's a wonderful response, and such a great story. I can picture that happening in the classroom as well. So, Martin, to finish on you reference your granddaughter and writing the book as a good news story. So obviously for you, storytelling is a really great way to get this out. So perhaps if you want to answer on yourself personally, what's your sort of hopes for change in the future, and what do you think Jane would say if she was asked that question?
Well, that's a difficult question for me, because I am by temperament as well as by profession a journalist, and journalists are about what is. And really my whole writing life has been about the fact, and certainly Aboriginal Australia confirmed me in the path, was that there is a lot of goodness in the world, and I have tried to honour it as I've come upon it, and I've tried to report it, as I said earlier, in a way that was honest and factual and real, not sentimental at all. And that was why I dedicated this book to my granddaughter, who's 11, because I think we're entering into a very tough century, and I wanted her to know that there is an obstinate force for good in the world, and I'm not making out I'm perfect, because I'm not making out anyone's perfect, but I'm still saying there's a force for good in the world. And I said in the book that Jane reminds me of Elizabeth Fry, who was the prison reformer in the Georgian times, and they had similar backgrounds, they had similar ways of operating. And Elizabeth Fry, we know she existed, that's a fact. So there have been good people throughout history. There are good people now, and I hope that book describes a number of them. And so I hope my granddaughter can take the hope or the knowledge that there's going to be good people in the future, and because of that, there is hope.
That's a beautiful answer. And I'm going to end by acknowledging Jane, but in your words, Martin, I really love this quote that you've said about Jane. So hello again to Jane out there. She's personally invested in every aspect of her operation and works ferociously hard. Her work transcends race, religion and gender. She's dynamic, but she's also sensible, brave and constant. Once you're in her orbit, she's there for you. So I think that's a really perfect place to end, and thinking about the idea of orbit as well and ignition. And I think this is going to be really encouraging for people, whether it's in your own business or in any social change that you're interested. It's about doing it, kind of hitting your strides. We spoke in some of the articles that we've done. Maybe it sort of sparks and a few goes, or a lot of elbow grease, but I think that ignition point's really important. So I will close because we're right on 7 o'clock, and I ask my panel to stay there as well. But we thank you incredibly for your time tonight from down south. And our next topic is on one of my favourite things, and it is related to what we've been saying. One of my favourite words, it's pedagogy. So we're looking at the emerging knowledge economy and the way that people are learning, decentralisation of all of the universities and things. So please look out for that on the 1st of September as we release our new topic. But again, thank you everyone for joining us online, and we will be back down in the cinema next month with a new Insight panel. Good night.